de Torrehermosa.
This is in
This is where
Spain,
they
guys.
play each day. And so they're out there playing football when suddenly a roaring noise fills the air, and coming from a distance was this silver bullet-shaped object swooping over the houses in the distance and coming towards them. Now, I will just quote the witness directly. He did give an interview in French, and I found the original article with his testimony. And as CS says in his own words, "We saw a machine arrive at fantastic speed, and there were two guys inside. It arrived by doing this." He made a circular motion. "The object came roughly from the north towards the west, then veered towards the east. It happened like that. We were playing. It passed over us and stopped 500 meters away. As it arrived, we heard a strange, absurd noise. First we heard the noise. We were playing football, and it was because of the noise that we began to look. It was like a jet plane, a very loud noise. It was an extraordinarily loud noise. It was crazy. It's incredible speed. But it stopped like an arrow in a straight line. I don't know what they were doing, but they seemed to be looking at us. Then, people from the street came running, women especially, because the men were at work in the fields or elsewhere. They were alerted by the noise and cries of others. We had never seen a machine like that. It started to slow down, and we started running behind. It slowed down more and more and stopped a half-kilometer away. It happened very quickly, a very rapid deceleration, and then hovered in the air without anything touching the ground about 3 meters from the ground. And there were two guys in it. I couldn't tell you how it was made. It was transparent, but not all of it. We could see inside. We saw the people, but we couldn't see their legs. We only saw the head and shoulders. I thought they were sitting because it wasn't very wide, the thing, maybe 1 meter in diameter. So everyone there was totally amazed. Nobody had ever seen anything like it, and many of them were familiar with aircraft, having recently been through a war. This object was sleek and shiny, metallic. They said it looked like aluminum. And as CS says, we could see the heads of the two men inside. So there were 30 people who came running, and at least I was one of the last because I was kicking the ball. I had to pick it up. So let's say I was 30 or 40 meters behind the others, but everyone was running. And then, when they were about 50 meters from this object, it took off again, and it was out of sight of us in a second, practically. It went away like a bullet.
Please
At
subscribe
fantastic
to
speed I've
Preston
never seen
Dennets,
before. It left like that,
Lightgate.
towards the east.
He's got a channel on YouTube.
So,
Please
this
check his
craft
original
left when the
video.
people had gotten pretty close to it,
This is
about
fair
150
use,
feet.
and we're just commenting
And the main witness got
because
close
he's
enough
my friend.
to
I hope he
see
doesn't
that
copyright me.
these figures inside did
Love you
not appear to be
guys.
wearing any
Talca,
flight suits. He said that a
George,
skin color unlike
God Files,
anything
big
he'd
hug,
ever seen,
sister.
as he says, quote, kind of greenish. Though
Brandy,
otherwise, he says they
my
looked
awesome
human.
sister.
But he did
Hope
also
you're
see
doing
what
good.
looked like some sort of
And
antenna on the
Derek,
top of
awesome
their heads.
hug, brother.
And he had the very strong impression that the occupants of the craft had stopped intentionally so that everyone could see it. And in fact, after it stopped, the figures inside the craft turned their heads and looked at all the witnesses. Some of the witnesses at this point waved at the occupants, gesturing for them to land. The occupants waved back, but instead of landing, took off. And strangely, afterward, as we see in so many of these cases, there wasn't much talk about it at all. But
on my cell phone, I have a king's crown on my name. Who put that there?
Remember for the rest of his life.
Sorry, guys.
Certainly an interesting case. I think it's even more interesting that this case was investigated by Richard Moss of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and again, it shows how careful you have to be when trying to determine the nature of a UFO landing with occupants. And it took place just outside of the very small town of Ross, North Dakota, and the main witness is a farmer by the name of Keith Myers. And in fact, the incident took place on his farm. It was a moonlit night around 11 p.m. one evening in the fall of 1965. Keith was inside his house, looked out the window, and noticed a strange object had landed in his fields, reflecting in the moonlight, not too far away, not super close either. And as Keith says, I saw the craft after noticing light reflecting off of it. I then took a rifle with a good scope, set it on the window ledge, and viewed the craft. I could see it had two occupants in flight helmets and wearing military-type flight suits. I could see faces through the helmets after I switched my refractive telescope. They were human, and I presumed most probably military. So while the figures did appear to be human-looking, the craft most definitely did not look conventional. And as you can see from the drawing made by the witness, it appeared to be very much your classic flying saucer. And as Keith says in his own words, the craft was grayish silver, saucer-shaped, with three supports or tripod struts. A windshield wrapped partly around the craft in front. It had what I now assume were flight surfaces, but not flaps, or such as traditional winged craft used. It sat there for perhaps less than an hour. I was doing something in my room while I sat on my desk watching it. My eyes got tired viewing through the scope, and when I looked up, it was gone. No engine sound or roar. So Keith wasn't quite sure what to make of this. So the next morning, he decided he would go to investigate the landing location. And as he says in his own words, I did go to where I thought the craft had sat, and in rather freshly cultivated field, the pads made imprints about 1.5 to 2 inches. So this was a solid object, clearly wasn't his imagination. Something had landed there, but he was puzzled. Human or ET, us or them. Either way, what was it doing in his field? And a few days later, he received some startling additional information about this encounter. As he says in his own words, while driving
Smurf
back
family.
roads, we noticed an enclosed wagon setting off the road in a real rural area with an Air Force pickup sitting beside it. An airman was standing with an N-16 on guard. We stopped and began talking with him, and eventually with the two others inside, and asked them what they were doing. As it had a radar dish on top of the wagon, they replied that they were supporting helicopters while the Minuteman missiles were being installed.
Nice Humvee.
However, perhaps after about 2 hours or so, I asked the first airman what they were really up to, and I told him about the craft I had seen. He said that's what they were really up to, supporting this new surveillance craft. So, here we have a military officer telling a farmer that the flying saucer he saw was military. But again, if so, what was it doing landing in Keith Myers' field? And, furthermore, what is a military officer doing revealing state secrets? Could this have been a deliberate misleading of the witness? I don't know. The witness came away believing it was a military craft. But again, it shows that just because someone sees a landed UFO with occupants, you can't assume anything really about where it's coming from. So as I said, you can't be careful enough when interpreting these cases. I think it's very possible that that was, in fact, reverse engineered ET technology. Then again, can't be sure. I find it quite unusual that they would just land right in this farmer's yard.
Sorry
like
for that, Preston.
I also find it unusual that the military officer that the witness spoke to admitted so freely that this was ours. Could that be sort of a red herring or disinformation? I don't know. Again, you'll have to make up your own mind about it. But I thought it was important.
Guys, this is what I like about Preston. He gives us the option to decide. That's the freedom that we need,
quite a bit
guys.
of publicity. I'm not sure you've heard it before, though it is fairly well known in its country of Argentina. And I call this one,
We gotta
You
make
Are
our own
Going
research.
to Know the World. This is mostly a single witness case involving a young teenager. However, there were some outside supporting witnesses. It took place on July 2nd, 1968, during a huge wave of sightings in this area. The actual location of this encounter was Sierra Chica, Argentina, and it's quite an unusual case with some very interesting physical evidence and a very unusual, to say the least, interaction with extraterrestrials who look largely human but clearly aren't quite like us. The main witness in this case is 14-year-old Oscar Iriart, and he had an experience which would cause a local sensation in his small town of Sierra Chica, Argentina. Now, at the time, he was working as a bookkeeper at a local bakery, so he's an upstanding young man. But it was around 11:30 a.m. He was horseback riding not too far from his home. He had his young puppy with him, and as he came around a bend in the road, he saw two men ahead of him, gesturing for him to approach. They were out in the field and kind of approaching towards the
Big
road.
hug, Sister
Thought
Brandy.
at first that they were bird
Have a
hunters.
wonderful weekend,
They
my
were
sister.
5.5 feet. They had short white hair.
Always a
They wore
privilege
red
and a
shirts, white
pleasure to
pants,
have you
black
here,
shoes.
sister.
But they were unusual looking for sure, and they looked identical. As
Big
Oscar
hug,
says,
Frostbite.
apart from the constant unblinking way in which they gazed fixedly at me with their deep-set eyes, they might have been just any ordinary men, such as we see every day here in Sierra Chica. I approached, and they told me to get off the horse and that they were going to take me. So I did. And they told me they were carrying a load. They said they came loaded. So at this point, they pointed to a landed craft just a short distance behind them in the culvert in this field. And according to Oscar, this craft was saucer-shaped, silvery metallic, not very big, about 6 feet long, very thin. It stood on 3 landing legs. As he says, the apparatus was oval with 3 legs. I couldn't see anything inside. So at this point, one of the men spoke to him in Spanish out loud and said, "You are going to know the world." And Oscar said, "Yes, of course, when I have money enough."
Take me,
And
please.
the visitor said, "No, we will take you. We cannot take you now as we have a big load." Now at this point, Oscar started to notice some very unusual features. In fact, it looked like these guys' legs looked almost transparent. He could see the barbed wire fence behind them through their legs. So this was very confusing to him. But he became
Crazy.
distracted when one of the men reached down and handed
Translucent.
Oscar a note.
Light
And
beings.
he said it had a message for him. But first, before reading this note, this man asked Oscar to dip the note into a puddle of water. A strange request, certainly, but Oscar did as he was told. He walked up to a nearby puddle. The 2 men walked right behind him, following him. And as he dipped this paper in the water, he was surprised to see that it remained completely dry, and so did his hands. So that was very unusual. And this is when he looks down at the note and reads the message, which is written in Spanish. And there were the words, "You are going to know the world." And it was signed P. Saucer, or apparently signed. You can see the note here.
Oh my
Now, this is
God.
very strange. The word "you" is usted in Spanish. It was missing the last letter D.
Dogman, what do you think about this for the woo?
Now at this point, the
There's a
men
bit of
walked
woo
back
here.
over the craft, kind of lifted the top, climbed inside and closed it. At this point, very quickly, the machine took off vertically at high speed in total silence, but with a brilliant flash of light. And in just a few seconds, it was a tiny spot high in the sky and was gone. As Oscar says in his own words, "I didn't feel anything strange. They talked to me and I answered them. I didn't feel anything. Those who study say they spoke to me by telepathy, but I saw that they spoke to me, as you are talking to me now. Finally, when they left, they told me they weren't taking me because they were carrying cargo. The apparatus opened upwards, and the two guys got in like that, standing inside. I didn't feel any noise or anything, and it went straight up without a sound until it was lost. So at this point, Oscar felt almost as if he was waking up from a dream or something, but realizing he had experienced something very unusual, fear flooded through him, and he wanted to rush home. But as he approached his horse, he found that his horse was paralyzed, and so was his dog. They couldn't move, and they remained that way for the next 5 minutes, which absolutely freaked him out. But finally, they broke out of this paralysis. Oscar got on
Oh
his
my
horse
God, the
and
body
galloped a
paralysis,
half-mile
guys.
home, crazed. I mean, some people saw him and were surprised at the state of his panic and fear. Arriving home, his parents
Dagmar!
were very concerned by his wild-eyed,
Good afternoon,
terrified
good to
state.
see you, sister.
He very excitedly told them what had happened, showed them the note.
Please check Dagmar
So they
out,
were
my awesome
astonished by this,
friends.
somewhat skeptical and disbelieving, but they could see that their son was very emotionally distraught, so they and some neighbors immediately returned to the spot where Oscar said this happened, and they were amazed to see 3 holes in the ground in the shape of a triangle, a perfect isosceles triangle, 6 feet on one side and 4.5 feet on the other 2, and the holes were about 5 or so inches deep. So word spread fast, and military officials from nearby Oliveria showed up to take soil samples. Meanwhile, Oscar's father, Heriberto Antonio Iriart, went to the police and reported the incident to Sergeant Raul Coronel, who refused to take any action, refused to take the story seriously. He believed it was just too ridiculous to be true. But events weren't over yet, because that
Guys, look at my
evening,
bottle.
this sergeant,
Still full,
Sergeant
guys. I
Coronel, was
haven't
at
been
the Sierra
drinking.
Chica Social Club with a group of other men, and they began talking and joking about this
Because I've been runny nose, so it
Oscar's
doesn't taste as
crazy
good.
experience. And all of them were skeptical, but just on a lark, they decided to go visit the landing site. They brought a powerful flashlight. They arrived at around 11:15 p.m., went to the area, and they verified that there were holes in the ground, but they thought that these holes could have been easily faked. The soil was quite loose. But that's when one of these men, his name is Carlos Marinangeli, he's a butcher, he shouted out
Ouch.
to the others,
Butcher,
"Look
ouch.
out! A light is coming in our direction." And they all looked, and sure enough, there was this brilliant object approaching them. It was only a few meters above the ground, but it was zigzagging in this strange pattern towards them. And the men became quite frightened. They threw themselves to the ground as the light approached them. And in fact, the sergeant, Sergeant Coronel, pulled out his revolver and was about to shoot at the light when the other men dissuaded him, told him it probably wasn't a good idea. At this point, the object moved across the field, suddenly increased in speed, then immediately darted straight upwards at super high velocity and was gone. So needless to say, all 5 of the men were convinced now that UFOs...
Just wait a second, guys. Guys, this guy's what they were talking about in the story. It just reminded me, 2 nights ago, I had a private Discord chat with some friends, and they were telling me their UFO sightings, and this reminded me one of them when my friend, I'll call him Mr. W. Mr. W, when he was very young, like on first grade, he had a tree house, and he was in the tree house playing, and he heard telepathy, someone talking to him saying to go away, leave where you are. And when he received that telepathic message, he looked to the sky and he saw like half a car-sized orb, gold color, and he started quickly going down the treehouse. And when he arrived down the lower part of the tree, he said he looked up and he saw the trees and the leaves shaking very much. And he told me that he saw like of a sort of portal opening and the orb going inside of it. And what he told me, guys, was that when he looked back and he saw the portal opened, I'm not sure if he saw the portal opening, but when he looked back, he saw like a sort of a opening, a tear in the sky, and not very far, like above him, above the tree, maybe like 15-20 feet. And he said that the only explanation he has for this is that the orb shown him what it was doing, and it warned him to leave because he would have injuries. Still, guys, he still has injuries because he had heart problems as a result of that. And it's not congenital heart problems, it's the heart problems only came after this sighting when he was very young. He was on first grade. Okay, so let's continue, guys. Hope you enjoyed.
Surreal.
Just
And
remembered.
probably Oscar had described a real experience. And they returned to the station where they were questioned by the other police there and reporters. And they described what they saw and said, yes, the flying saucers do exist. Not surprisingly, Sergeant Coronel was chastised later by his superiors for talking to the press without first having submitted a report to them. But this just created an absolute interest in what Oscar had experienced, and soon crowds of people began to mob the Erie Arts to stake out the field where these UFOs had been seen. Now, the neighbors did say that the Erie Arts were a respectable family, and Oscar's whole family stood by him. As Oscar says, everyone in my family believed me because they know me as a child, as I am. I'm Catholic. Now, he wasn't a strict Catholic, but apparently he's known as an honest child. And in fact, his mother said that Oscar refused to set foot in that field for nearly a year afterwards. That's how frightened he was. Nor did he want to go out at all because everyone wanted to talk to him about what had happened. And as she says, now he doesn't talk about those things anymore. Now, in further support of Oscar's experience is the fact that during this time, Argentina was experiencing a massive wave of UFO activity. In fact, as investigated by Argentine researcher Gustavo Fernandez, just a few weeks after Oscar's encounter the same month, and about 50 miles away in Tepalque, Argentina, 3 soldiers of the Argentine army said that they came upon 3 humanoids and a landed craft. These humanoids were just walking around the craft. They went to investigate and get close, but as they approached, they said the ETs shot a beam of light at them. At this point, they weren't unable to move and could not move until these ETs got back in the craft, which departed. So certainly a fascinating series of events. Oh yeah, I don't know. That case is really unusual, given that the kid was given a paper note by the ETs. And honestly, I probably would have dismissed it if not for the outside supporting witnesses and the landing traces and the fact that his own family really
Guys,
stands
join
behind
us
him,
at
and
Preston
believes he
Dennets
was
on
telling the truth about
Mondays,
it. Because it's such an unusual
2
case. It's
a.m.
definitely a bit of an
English
outlier,
time,
but
less 5
appears to
hours in
be
America.
legitimate. And
I know it's a bit
his
late, guys,
witness
for
was
the
followed up through
Europeans.
the years, and he's still sticking to his story to this day. So make of it what you will. Because there's always another
These
case.
Mondays
That's
are
what's so amazing
truly
about this phenomena is the
mind
huge
changers
number
for
of
me, guys.
cases.
That's what I feel.
I've said it before, but it bears repeating. The general public has no real idea just how common this is. And again, most people don't talk, so we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg here. And here is another case, which is probably my favorite
Oh,
in
look
this
who's
little
there. I'm over
collection,
there, guys.
because wow, this witness
Can you
was able
see?
to
Look, John
parse
P is over
ETs
there.
and just get loads of information about them. I call this this particular segment "Everything is God." And yeah, a
Terry
very
D, hope you're
unusual
doing
case
good,
which
my
took place in
brother.
July of 1968 at Grodner Pass in the Dolomite Mountains of Italy. It is a single witness
John
case,
P's
though there
everywhere,
is
guys.
physical landing traces in support of it. There are some who are skeptical of it, but honestly, I think this case is legitimate given the details that this gentleman describes.
Yes,
In
some
fact, you can
details,
hear a
guys.
first-hand interview with him
You
if you
cannot
search on the
imagine
internet.
that. I don't
The
believe
channel
it.
Eyes on Cinema covered this case briefly,
Eyes on
but it
Cinema channel.
definitely is worth
I
taking a
also
deeper
follow
look
them.
into because it's a fantastic case.
They
The
are
main witness
amazing,
in this case
guys.
is
Eyes on
Walter
Cinema. Check them
Rizzi,
out.
and as I said, his encounter occurred in July of 1968. But there's a little bit of a prequel to this case, because back in 1942, Walter Rizzi was working as an interpreter between the Italian and German air forces in Greece. And it was here that he had the opportunity to meet a local holy man who was allegedly more than 100 years old and gifted with all kinds of psychic ability, astral travel to other worlds, he says, would give prophecies of the future, and things like this. And so he sort of became friends with this holy man. And at one point, this holy man told Walter Rizzi that one day in his future, he would have an encounter with, quote, beings from the cosmos. And Walter was very impressed because the old man had already shown him many miraculous things. Then, decades later, one evening in July of 1968, Walter was driving through the Grodner Pass in the Dolomite Mountains of Italy and became fogged in. So he had to pull over as the fog was so thick it was too dangerous to navigate the pass. And he pulled over and was dozing in his car when he woke up because he could smell something burning. And he thought it might be his car, which was turned off, but going outside it clearly wasn't his car. And then, through the mist, he saw a brilliant, bright light. And as the mist parted, he saw this, quote, enormous thing, which had landed on the ground not too far away from him. Now, he instantly thought of the holy man's prophecy that was given to him many years earlier and realized that the prediction was likely now coming true. And he became filled with this fantastic excitement. He quickly grabbed his flashlight and approached the craft. But he discovered something very interesting. He could only get so close to it before he hit a strange, invisible barrier. He tried to get closer, but he couldn't. Something was holding him back. So he just stared up at the craft in amazement. And as Walter says, in his own words, the object was wonderfully beautiful, silvery in color, and about 80 meters in diameter, standing on 3 legs about 2 meters long and about 2
Terry, I'm
meters
in
thick at the
Portugal,
bottom.
brother.
The UFO was bathed in a
But I've
fleecy
been to
white
Florida
light.
once.
The transparent cupola on the top of the craft now lit up brightly, and I saw 2 beings in it who were looking down at me. The
Enjoy
right hand
the
side of the
family
machine
time,
was a
Terry.
robot, about
Send her
2.5
a
meters
hug for
high,
me.
and with 3 legs and 4 arms.
And I
You can
hope
see it
you both
pictured
have a
here.
wonderful
And as Walter says, it was
weekend.
holding the outside of the craft and making it rotate. From the center of the craft came a beam of light, violet and orange in color, and from within this beam of light I saw coming down out of the
Guys, be
craft
careful with the
a
beams of
being
light,
dressed
okay,
in tight.
guys? Let me just do a quick break. If you see a beam of light from the sky, guys, consider not staying very close, okay? Let's go back.
Fitting suit and with a glass hood over the head. He came right up to me until he was no more than 1 meter from me. So Walter says that this being was just under 5 feet tall, had a wide head, short hair, kind of looked like fur, he said, wide set, slanted, green-blue cat-like eyes, a very small nose and mouth, very smooth olive green skin, broad shoulders, a very thin body. And he says that this figure held up its hand palm first in greeting. And as Walter says, I find it quite impossible to describe the emotion produced in me by the sight of this being.
Jamie, what up?
Eyes, which gave me a strange and very sweet sensation. I felt myself as free and light as a feather. At the same time, I also felt quite calm, and I gazed at him eagerly. Now, it was at this point that a lengthy telepathic conversation ensued, and in fact, as soon as Walter was able to form a question in his mind, it was instantly answered. He first asked, "Where do they come from?" And the being replied that their planet is 10 times the size of Earth and has 2 suns, resulting in very long days and just a brief night. He said they have
Wow.
vegetation and animals very much like ours, but of slightly different shapes and sizes. He says that they have very high mountains and immensely tall trees.
Oh,
The being
love
told
that.
Walter that all
Love
their work
ancient
is done
huge trees, guys.
automatically, that they are able to accomplish all kinds of
Stuart, good
physical
afternoon,
tasks
brother. Big
using
hug.
psychic abilities. He said that they subsist on fruit and vegetables and grains. Walter's asking all these questions and he's answering them. He said that they have cured pretty much all illness and disease on their planet. They said Earth's gravity was quite light for them. And in fact, that matched what Walter said, because as this being approached, it kind of approached to him in a light, hopping manner.
Yep, like
So he's
floating.
staring at this being, and he asked this being, was he a man or a woman? And the being replied that he was neither, and that they reproduce in ways that are different from ours. At this point, Walter reached out to touch him, but felt this same sort of magnetic force field, which prevented him from approaching the craft. He tried a couple of times to reach out and touch this being, but could not do it. And the being started to describe the craft, and told Walter that he was looking at a smaller craft, and that it actually came from a mother ship, which was the same basic shape, but much larger, about 5 kilometers in diameter, and that it contained many other craft, both manned and unmanned. Walter asked how they travel throughout the universe, and they said that they use what he would think of as a magnetic drive. They said that they could not stay too long in Earth's system, as it causes them to age rapidly.
Oh
He
my
asked how
god.
long they were. He says that they live about 100 times longer than humans.
So Earth makes us
At one point,
age
Walter asked if they had
more
defensive
quicker,
weapons,
guys.
and the
Because of
being said
the
that they can
shorter
disintegrate
days.
anything, even at great distance, and offered to actually demonstrate this to Walter. He instructed Walter to throw a rock at the craft. So Walter picked up a rock and threw it at it. As he says, I hurled the stone with all my might right at the cupola, whereupon a whitish lilac
Oh my
colored
god,
beam
look at
of
that.
light
I've
shot out from
seen
it.
some
The stone
woman
exploded
very
with a dull report,
close like that.
and I saw not even a
Oh
single
my
fragment
god,
of
look
it
at the
fall to the
eyes.
ground.
Ouch.
So this was
A little bit of
absolutely a
serpent
very long,
eyes there.
involved conversation. As Walter says, I asked him why they are not willing to help us with their technology and remain on our planet, and also how long it would be before we had their kind of technology. He gave me to understand that first, they are not allowed to interfere in the development of another planet. Secondly, he said we would never reach their level of evolution since the crust of our planet is far too variable, and that in the near future there will be a displacement of our poles. In the process of the adjustment to this polar shift, an enormous crack would develop on the surface of our planet, and this would entail an upheaval on the Earth that would destroy 80% of all living things here, leaving the survivors to carry on in a habitable strip of the planet. So this was quite alarming. It certainly does match up with what other witnesses have learned from the ETs. And then Walter asked the ET if they believed in God. He said the ET seemed surprised by the question and said that, quote, everything is God. We, nature, the planets, rocks, grass, in fact, everything that exists. And it was about this time that the robotic-looking device began to float up and enter into the craft, and Walter understood that it was time for the ET to go. The other being that was still up in the cupola made a gesture of acknowledgement to Walter. Walter then asked them for an artifact of theirs, and the being said no, as it would be harmful to him, to Walter. At this point, overcome with emotion, Walter began weeping, and he actually knelt down and first asked and then begged for the ET to take him with them. He was ready to leave Earth and everything behind. But the ET said that no, neither Walter nor anyone from Earth can go with them, but that he was very lucky to have met them and had this conversation. The being then returned to the craft, and Walter says this force field pushed him a further distance from the craft, and at this point the craft grew dim. This opposing force field pushed Walter further away, and the craft then lit up, rose from the ground, made a loud whistling sound, and shot straight up at super high speed and disappeared. At this point, Walter became absolutely overcome with despair. He realized he was covered with sweat. He returned to his car in a complete daze. After recovering, he went to his destination. He tried to tell his family and friends what happened, was very disappointed to discover that they were skeptical. And because of that, he ended up keeping secret about his encounter for about a decade. However, he did return to the site about 20 days later and saw impressions on the ground where this heavy craft had pressed into the soil. He also noticed something else. The grass around the area where this craft had landed was 3 times larger than any of the grass around it. Another thing he noticed, his watch began losing about 2 hours per day. And for a month after the encounter, he said he was unnaturally tired and did experience some hair loss. Thankfully, he did recover from this, but overall, the only lasting effects was how it affected him emotionally, spiritually, mentally. As Walter says, the experience changed my character greatly and had a profound effect on my attitude to all questions of religion or politics. I have come to the realization that we humans are really still very crudely constituted, and that, as the being said to me, we have animal-like tendencies. A lot of interesting elements to that case. The fact that this holy man predicted the witness would have an encounter, and then he did. The feelings the witness described upon seeing the craft, seeing the ETs, all the descriptions the ET gave, the description of the ET themselves, the description of the craft. I mean, all of it lines up with so many other cases. I think it's a legitimate case. Just my opinion. As always, it's up to you to determine what you think about each case. And here's another. So many. I like this case too. It's quite interesting because it is a multiple witness case of a bunch of young women who saw 2 ETs very close up. I call this one Humanoids in the Tajuca Forest. and this one occurred on August 24, 1974, in Alto da Boa Vista, Brazil, which is surrounded by the Tijuca forest, and there had been reports of humanoids being seen prior to the witnesses seeing humanoids in this case. And while it is a somewhat brief case compared to most of these in this little collection, which are quite extensive, I still think it has some very interesting elements to it. This next case did occur in a very rural area of Brazil. The main witness is Regina Conceição, and she had always been interested in the paranormal, but what she and her friends saw on August 24th, 1974, gave them quite a scare. Regina and her four friends, their names were Jeanette, Ingrid, Viola, and Maria Teresa, were all university students, and they were standing just outside the gate of one of their homes on this street called Estrada da Vista Chinese. And this is, again, a very rural area outside of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Now, when it was Maria Teresa who first saw something moving along the road and shouted out to her friends, "What's that?" And this road, as you can see, is surrounded by forest, and it was not unusual for them to see animals of all kinds. But what they saw was definitely not an animal. It was walking on 2 feet. They saw 2 humanoid figures, and they were floating almost 2 feet above the street. These figures were dressed identically in golden jumpsuits with helmets and what looked like visors. And while they were floating above the ground, their legs moved in this walking motion. Their legs and arms were moving, but they were up in the air. Both figures were side by side. Regina did notice that they kept their arms fully straight and did not flex them at the elbows. She says their outfits reminded her very much of astronauts, complete with helmet and boots, but that the texture and the color was quite unusual. It was a scaly, golden, metallic texture. They estimate that these figures were about 5.5 feet tall, but seeing that these beings were moving towards them, all 5 of the young women immediately became frightened and ran back into the house and locked the door. Because as it turns out, earlier they had heard reports about floating humanoids being seen in this area of the Tijuca forests. In fact, multiple people had said that they'd seen these humanoids, and some were reporting seeing UFOs. These sightings were causing a minor panic among the townsfolk of this area, though when researchers contacted authorities in the town to verify this, authorities denied the reports. Regina was interviewed by researcher Irene Granchi. She provided drawings of the beings for Irene, and while Regina did get a good look at them, she said that she was unable to see through the visors on their heads because they were too reflective. They were reflecting the sunlight. And also, she said that she does not remember seeing what their hands looked like, that these were clearly not normal people. I really wonder what the ETs are up to in all of these cases, just floating down the road like that towards the witnesses.
Okay, guys, we're halfway.
1 foot or 2 off the road, all dressed up in their little shiny jumpsuits. It's a fascinating case. I find all of these super interesting because we're only seeing just little bits and pieces of what these ETs are up to. I imagine that most of what goes on is not witnessed by humans in any capacities. So again, this is just one piece of the puzzle that we're getting. And now on to the next case, which I call I Can't Get It Out of My Mind. That being, of course, a direct
Derek, I don't think I agree completely on that.
Though it isn't just one simple sighting. In fact, this gentleman apparently did have missing time. This case occurred in July of 1975.
I'm not sure if Dolly has contacted other species. I'm not sure about that.
Missing time can be almost seamless when someone has a very close encounter. And of course, he saw humanoids, or what appear to be humanoids, The main witness in this case is Frank Slada. He's pictured here. And it was one evening in July of 1975 that Frank was driving his wife home to their place of
Yep,
residence
even
in
though
Edgewater. His wife
supposedly
worked at the Radium Hot Springs Lodge.
the
And in fact,
aliens
so did he.
say that
So he
there
went
is
to
no
pick her
good and
up.
evil.
Along with him was their daughter Linda, as well as two of their neighbors.
I
And they left
think
the
they
Radium
say
Hot
that
Springs
because
Lodge,
they are,
just reached the highway, and gone about a
you know,
mile when
light
they noticed,
beings
all of
and they
them,
cannot
an
harm each
unusually
other.
bright star-like light directly
That's
above a
my
ridge to the right. And Linda
my
shouted
take on
out,
it, I think.
"That light's moving," and she's pointing at it. They could see it was unusual, so Frank quickly stopped the car. They all rolled down the windows to get a better look. And as Linda says, the light moved a little more, blanked out, then all of a sudden it was over the hill above the power station. And by that she means a sort of transformer unit that was alongside the highway. So they were all a bit puzzled by it, but they just decided to continue driving home. Now, Frank worked at the Radium Lodge as a night watchman, and he had to return there in just a few minutes for his shift. So he dropped his wife and everyone else off at the house and turned around and began his drive back to the lodge. And coming around that corner where they had seen the unidentified light, there it was again. And as Frank says, in his own words, "I looked up and saw the light real close, right above the power station. So I slowed right down, and then, and there, I saw there were three strange-looking sort of orangey beams shining down. They were large, and I could see everything, even the needles on the pine trees." So realizing he had stopped in the middle of the road, Frank pulled over, stopped the car on the side. He said other cars continued to drive by, but strangely, none of them stopped. None of them seemed to notice this very obvious UFO, because Frank could now see that this wasn't just a light, it was some sort of craft. And as he says, it was a double-shaped deal, about 40 feet wide, maybe more. On top, there was a part with rectangular windows lit from the inside, and below, there was a larger part with lights shining out from the rim. So this craft, as you can see, is pretty much saucer-shaped, circular, with a dome on top. He estimates this dome was somewhere about 6 to 8 feet high, and it had a long window in the center. It was close enough that he could hear it making a low, swishing noise. And as he stared at it, Frank noticed that there was movement inside. Something alive was inside of it. But he found himself almost hypnotized and entranced by the sight. As he says, "For some reason, I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Twice, while I looked, I saw a shadow moving by as if there was somebody inside. I couldn't see a head or anything, it was just a shadow, and it seemed that maybe there was more than just one." And finally, and suddenly, Frank came out of his trance and pulled his eyes away from the object. And fearing that he might be late for work, he looked at his watch, and he got an incredible shock, because more than an hour had passed while he watched the object. And as he says, he thought it was more like 10 minutes. So he quickly drove to the lodge only 1 mile away, and as he exited his car, he looked over towards where the area where he had seen the object, and was amazed to see it off in the distance, brilliantly lit. It had moved upwards and was now visible above the ridge where it had been hovering. And he had the impression that it was almost as if the occupants of this object had wanted him to see it. So Frank rushed into the lodge and called his wife on the phone, and this is when he learned it was now 1:30 a.m. He was supposed to start work at midnight, so he definitely had missing time. The next morning, he returned to the site in hopes of finding some evidence. He had to find a back road that took him part way up the ridge and hike the rest of the way. He was determined. But as he says, "But there was nothing. I spent an hour looking around, but there wasn't a sign it had been there." So it must have been in the air all the time, even though it looked as if it was on the ground. The only thing he did notice was that there was a power pole right below where the object had hovered. But it was an experience that he would remember for the rest of his life. There you go. One more case, one more piece of the puzzle towards understanding what is going on our planet. In so many cases, I don't know how skeptics still exist on this planet. There's just far too many cases, far too much evidence, far too many witnesses for this all to be explained as hoaxes, hallucinations, or misperceptions, as our government has tried so hard to convince us for so many decades. And now let's move on to the next case, another favorite for sure in this collection. I call this one, I Didn't Dare Say Anything. And what's interesting about this case is it started out with a single witness who saw a landed UFO, a very unusual humanoid, but the case continued on over a period of days and ended up involving more than a dozen witnesses. So it's a really remarkable case with multiple witnesses involving some absolutely unusual interactions with different types of ETs, as it turns out. The location of this next encounter in Domaine, Isère, France, is a tiny little town. And it was at 5:50 p.m., again on January 5, 1976, that 10-year-old Jean-Claude Sylvente had a remarkable encounter that would actually presage a series of even more exciting events. He was outside his home, walking through a vacant lot, when without warning, a craft landed about 30 feet away from him. It was, he estimates, 15 feet high, glowing white, and was resting on 5 thin landing legs. And as Jean-Claude says, suddenly I heard a whistling sound. I turned around, and behind me in the brushwood, I saw lying on the ground about 5 feet away a craft which had a cone shape, all illuminated with several colors. A door opened and a man came out. He was very tall, with long hair. He ran towards me, stretching his arms out. So this was a very unusual looking figure. Yes, he was mostly human looking, but he was very tall, blonde hair, long blonde hair, but he wore this tight-fitting, kind of shiny, full-body jumpsuit that was very unusual. And even more unusual, Jean-Claude noticed that there were strange glowing green objects or rings on his hand. At this point, Jean-Claude sneezed. The tall visitor turned and looked at him, and that's when it started coming towards him. And Jean-Claude panicked and ran. And as he says, I thought I was dreaming. When I got back, I didn't dare say anything. Now, his mother could see that something had clearly frightened her son. As she says, my son was terrified. I had never seen him like that. But he didn't want to talk about it. And it was the next evening, January 6th, that was even more amazing. Because at 6 p.m., Jean-Claude went outside his home to get some milk and saw this same tall figure again. He didn't see the craft, just the figure, but this figure was following him down the sidewalk about 80 feet away. As Jean-Claude says in his own words, coming back at the side of the road under a tree, I saw the same man as the day before. He was wearing a shiny jumpsuit, and once again he stretched out his arms, wanting to run after me. On one hand, he had a big green ring. So Jean-Claude ran home. He spilled all the milk he had collected. His mother, again, seeing her son terrified, became very curious about what was going on. And as she says in her own words, I wanted to get to the bottom of it. With my daughter, Eliane, and a friend of hers, Marcel Solvini, we took a flashlight and ran to the place indicated by Jean-Claude. No sooner had we arrived at this place that we saw a big red headlight coming down from the sky, which advanced in our direction. I had never seen such a thing. We did not ask for more, and I immediately rushed to the gendarmerie, which happens to be very close to my house. So these are the police, and all of these close, witnesses felt that this object was coming down almost as if it was going to land right on top of them. This is what they told the police. The police listened and returned to the encounter location. By this time, there was nothing unusual to be seen. However, it turned out that many other people had seen this same object on that night. There was a Monsieur Taillefer, who was the mayor of the nearby town of Clay. He said that around 5 p.m. he saw an unusual luminous object moving around in the sky. Two other young children in this area, Annalise and Hinager, said that they saw the same strange tall being that Jean-Claude had described. In fact, one of the girls confirmed the details described by Jean-Claude, saying that the being wore a shiny jumpsuit and held in his hand, quote, something very shiny and green. So the police started conducting an investigation, and they found a total of at least 15 people who said that they saw UFOs in that area on that night. And it was only 2 days later, on January 8, that a 17-year-old boy, again in Domaine, went to the police to report that he had seen a UFO land in the same exact spot that Jean-Claude had seen the UFO. The 17-year-old told the police, and I quote, Thursday, around 9, when I was at the entrance of Domaine, I saw arriving in the air a big bright light, red and yellow. When it approached, I distinguished a conical object about 20 meters in diameter at the base. The object went to land not far from the National Road on a deserted ground. Taken by fear, I ran away. So he said the object was 25 feet high, and the reason he ran away, because he saw this glowing humanoid form emerge from the craft, and that was enough for him. But events were still in progress, because the next evening, January 9th, in the town of Echeville, which is very close to Domaine, a gentleman by the name of Jean Dolecki was driving home when he saw this weird ball of light zooming across the sky, coming towards him as it was descending. And he watched it as it
I'm
went
back, my
by the
people.
side of the road. He said it was about 45 feet wide, 50 to 60 feet high, and cylindrical in shape with a narrow center.
Dave, big hugs, my brother.
Firsthand, because as he says regarding this craft, it had the shape of an Italian coffee maker. It shone as if it were covered with silver paper.
Coffee maker, guys, remember that.
To crash onto my truck or right in the middle of the road. I braked, then pulled over to the right, fascinated by this light. I cut off the ignition, left my lights on, and got out of the truck. I don't believe the machine was resting directly on the ground because the bottom of it emitted a bizarre light which did not diffuse around. I admit that I was afraid. I retreated a few meters without daring to get back into my truck. Then, in the upper part of the sphere, a door opened that looked to be about 2 meters high. I felt more and more disquieted. Suddenly, 3 forms were framed in the opening. 3 forms that seemed to be dressed in aluminum diving suits. They were not men, no, I can assure you of that. Rather, they were giant robots, of the same height as the door. They descended very rapidly from the machine. I saw then that they had small legs, and for arms, a sort of telescopic pole that made me think of a fishing rod. As to their heads, they resembled a square shape. The 3 beings moved away from the sphere. They walked like mechanical toys, by jumps, wagging their poles up and down. I did not move. I could hardly breathe. I could only think that the headlights of my truck, which I had left on, would surely attract them. But no, they didn't even seem to notice me. After about 10 minutes, the robots re-entered their craft, the door closed again, and the lights went out except for the top level of the sphere, which remained the same blinding white. Then the machine took off, disappearing at dizzying speed. I got back in my truck. Once in the cab, I made the sign of the cross. I was trembling so much, I couldn't get started. but there was only one thing I wanted to do to get home. So this really quite frightened him,
Oh,
and
me too.
events were still in progress. One day later, on the morning of January 10th, a political science student by the name of Hubert Martin saw a glowing bright light sitting on the ground near the village of Veynon. He said this object was about as big as a house. It was that same evening a Monsieur Masseron was sleeping in his trailer in nearby Calvados when he was woken up by banging sounds on the trailer, followed by scratching noises, and then his trailer began to actually shake. So looking outside, he saw a glowing egg-shaped object not too far away, about 5 feet wide or tall, 3 feet wide, and it was landed or close to it on the ground. He says it was greenish on top, reddish on the bottom, and as he watched, it rose up in a strange spiral motion, hovered at 50 feet, then disappeared. And he opened his door to investigate, and he heard voices talking, saying what sounded like letters. And he saw the dark silhouette of a human form running by, but it wasn't normal because it was tilted at a very strange angle. And unknown to him, around the same time, there was a Mrs. Zamora who lived in the same trailer park. She woke up, also hearing a strange voice, which she thought was saying, "What shall I do?" And she heard another voice answering, "Do as I do." And looking outside, she saw the same craft, which appeared to be yo-yoing up and down. And later, researchers investigating the area says that they did find strange footprints at the site. So with this, the whole series of events came to an end, or people stopped talking, but it certainly left many people convinced in that area that there was something about that area that was drawing in UFOs. As for the first witness, Jean-Claude Sylvente, he was left pretty traumatized by the encounter and especially by all the incoming reports. And according to his mother, Jean-Claude refused to go outside at night and stayed locked up inside the house when evening approached. So that's the kind of case that makes me wonder, because it may have all gone completely unreported if that first witness, Jean-Claude Sylvente, hadn't come forward. Because it was only the fact that he came forward and his case was publicized that other people started coming forth. So if he hadn't, the whole series of events could have
25
gone
minutes to
completely
go,
under the radar.
guys.
We would never know about it.
Fair
I suspect
use.
that's what's happening with most.
Preston Dennett
Even
is
ones that are
our
recorded,
friend,
people go to the
and
police and
we're
they don't hear
just
about it.
commenting
So
on his
again, much more common, I think, than people realize.
wonderful
What an
research.
interesting series of events
Join
that
us
was, with these
on
robotic-like
Mondays,
humanoids,
2
this really
a.m.
tall,
European time,
human-looking ET with
less
long
5
blonde
hours
hair.
in America.
I'm always wondering what these guys are up to visiting our planet. And here's another case, which also got quite a bit of publicity and led to more people coming forward to share their accounts of their encounters. This one I call "I Saw a Figure." This occurred on January 19, 1976, in the very little town of Heisler, New Jersey. And it's such an interesting case because there's a group of 7 witnesses, 2 families, 2 neighbors of each other, who had a very, very close-up encounter with a UFO, and one of them saw humanoids looking down at her through the window. It's a fascinating case. It was around 7:30 p.m., again on January 19, 1976, that Kay Peterson and Vi Camp, friends, were leaving Kay's home on Schoolhouse Lane, pictured here in Heislerville, New Jersey, a very tiny town, and they both saw this very unusual object with 2 extremely bright lights on it, hovering over the woods at treetop level to the west of their house, about 900 feet away. And it was immediately apparent to them that they were seeing a UFO. That's how unusual it was. So they immediately called out their neighbors, Wayne Tomlin, his wife, and their 2 children, who came running out of their home to see the UFO. the same time, Kay's son also ran out of the house to watch it. So now there's 7 witnesses watching it. And as Vi Camp says, we couldn't hear a sound. It was just sitting in mid-air just above the trees. So all 7 of them watched this object for just a few moments. They said the lights were really too bright for them to discern what kind of shape this object was, though they could see it was a solid object. But finally, Vi became curious and decided to approach a little bit more close to this object. And as she did, the bright white lights on the object suddenly became dim and turned a golden amber color. And this frightened Vi, and she immediately ran back to the group, at which point the lights became bright again. So they continued watching, and a few moments later, the lights became dim again, turned that same golden amber color, and now began to move in a straight line right towards them. And in fact, it came directly over their heads and stopped. And this is when they could see the shape of this craft, that it was actually sort of boomerang shaped. You can see their drawings here. On the bottom, some of the witnesses saw a series of 3 or 4 red lights on either side of the V. In the center was a large illuminated orange circle with weird looking sort of grid lines to it. Now Vi, apparently the curious one, decided to walk over to the street to get a more head-on view of this object. And doing so, she was able to see a dome or bubble-shaped cockpit in the front top section. And looking through this transparent section, she was amazed to see a, quote, man-sized silhouette showing the upper torso, arms, and head of a figure. As Vi says, I saw a figure in a small window. It was all dark, but it appeared like a figure form from the waist up, the form of a body. Now, one of the witnesses, Miss Tomlin, says she also noticed what looked like a glass cabin lit up from the inside, and she says she did see movement inside as well, but she couldn't say for sure whether this was a figure or perhaps just reflections moving around. But she was certain that the craft itself was very unusual. And it was so close at this point that all of them could hear this low humming noise. And they saw what looked like short, stubby wings or protrusions on the edge of this V shape. And as Miss Tomlin says, we see airplanes,
Pois, não
helicopters,
esqueces é para vir
cockpits,
para
and
dentro.
planes all the time, but I never saw an airplane move so slow
Sorry about
and
that,
without
guys.
making a noise, except it sounded like a refrigerator, a low humming. So finally, this craft moved off towards the East Point Lighthouse, and unknown to them, about 20 miles to the north in the town of Dorothy,
Houve aqui
Mrs. Charles
uma
Morris
senhora que
was at
disse que
her
nós
home
éramos
on
os
Cape
Smurfs
May Avenue
por causa de sermos
around
azuis.
7:45 p.m. and she describes
Não,
seeing an
no
object with,
YouTube, quando
quote,
tu dás
red with
uma
brilliant lights
rant,
off
que é para
it
ser
and
moderador,
ascending
as
below
pessoas
it.
ficam
It wasn't
azuis,
a steady beam,
o nome fica
but
azul, então
brilliant,
somos os
flickering
Smurfs.
light. I called to
Mas
myself
eu
to
não sou
look,
azul,
and we
eu estou
watched while
amarelo.
it hovered and made a small circle.
Sorry guys, I was just explaining my wife about the Smurf situation. Não, mas isto para vir para dentro. Eu daqui a 20 minutos isto acaba. Então dizes para vir para dentro. Okay guys, so it's about 5 o'clock now. And we will have 15 more minutes, okay?
And in fact, the patrolman said it approached to within 1,000 feet of him and frightened him to the point that he drove off to evade this object, which then began to pace his police cruiser. So he reported this. Other policemen were seeing objects as well. There were quite a few witnesses, actually. The Coast Guard dismissed these as lights from a fishing boat reflecting off the clouds. But it was this report, which appeared in local newspapers, that actually prompted Vi Camp and the others to go public with their own sightings. And Vi Camp, talking about her sighting, says, I thought about it all night. I couldn't hardly sleep. but I thought everybody would think we were crazy. Then, when I heard on the news about the police in Ventnor seeing a UFO, I thought it must have been the same one we saw. So sightings continued through the end of January, and there were a few other, or at least one other report
Smurfs.
of a possible strange humanoid walking down the street. But apparently Vi Camp is the only one who reported seeing the person inside this craft. It's a very unusual series of sightings.
Sorry about that, guys.
Some researchers have speculated in that case that could have been reverse
Not
engineered.
many publicity here, but we caught a few of them.
Shaped UFO, and there hasn't been a lot of reporting on reverse engineered craft of that kind. And I also wonder because this craft came so close to the witnesses and that type of behavior that we see so often, a display. It looked to me like it was showing off. It's also interesting because of the follow-up encounters, particularly with the police officer who tried to run away from the UFO and it just followed him right down the road. And military officials tried to describe it as reflections of a fishing boat off the coast, which is absurd because this craft came within 1,000 feet of this witness. And as a police officer, he's a trained observer. He knows what he's looking at. Oh, the debunking efforts in this field, just such a shame.
Yep, many debunks. Wait a second, sorry guys. Many, some debunkers, guys, can be worse than the hoaxers. We call them the hoaxer debunkers. So we have to be careful as well, guys. There are the hoaxers, but they are the hoaxer debunkers. Sorry, the debunker hoaxers. It doesn't matter. Some debunkers are good. Some debunkers are just not qualified, and they just how can I say, barf stuff out of their mouths. So we just have to be wary. I'm not here to tell you who is good or evil. I'm just gonna tell you one name that is one of my favorite debunkers. Mick West. Okay, guys, there's the name. But I'm a knower. I'm not a believer. I'm a knower, guys. But I haven't had much experiences. I just know it because of the. Okay, I've told you guys this before, but I know it because I have very close friends from here that seen UFOs, and I have a mother of a friend, very close people from me and my family, that on the 70s she saw a mothership in Mozambique in Africa, her and her husband, and she's had several sightings. No aliens, but crafts. She has seen the crafts before. And what I use as well is the statistics. So, guys, even if many of the stories are invented, you still are left with even more questions, cases and questions. Okay, guys, so let's go back.
Super interesting case. This one I call the Brantspeth Leprechaun. And this is how the witness perceived her encounter with this humanoid, because she didn't know what to think of it. She called it a goblin at one point, a leprechaun, a little man. As you'll hear from her description, it's quite unusual case, which occurred on January 2nd, 1995, in the little town of Brantspeth, England. It's a pretty brief encounter, but Super interesting. It was about 7:10 a.m. in the morning, January 2nd, 1995, as Diana Newton drove along the A690 road, pictured here, towards her place of employment in Durham. Now she was in Brantspeth and had just passed the Brantspeth Castle on her right and was going up a slight incline in the road, which was lined by a small fence with fields beyond, which you can see here. And as Diana says, through the front windscreen of my car, I saw this small object moving in a puppet-like action. I slowed right down alongside it and looked out of the left passenger window and saw what appeared to be a little man walking, about less than table height, 2 foot something, I would estimate. As I slowed alongside it, I was quite amazed, and I tried to take it all in, and I was amused as well. At first I thought someone was playing a trick with a remote control. It was quite dark, but I could see it from the front windscreen. I caught it in my light. I could see it from the side view as well, when I pulled alongside it. I would estimate it was 2 yards away. I slowed right down to observe it, virtually to a standstill. So I was in first gear, and I watched in amazement as it was walking. I was more amused with its puppet-like movement, and I took particular notice of the detail of its head and the shape of its body. The head was not pointed at the top, but fairly oval, and the chin was slightly pointed, and I could see an almond-shaped eye. It was like a side view as it was walking, and I sort of just looked at it, but it didn't look at me. I was alongside it, and it was to my side, and I was looking out the window at this side, and it sort of kept on walking, but I could see like an almond-shaped eye at the side of its head. I didn't see any other features on this character, just mainly this eye and its movement. So this creature, which Diana described alternatively as a goblin or a leprechaun or a little man, was a sort of a dull mustardy yellow in color. She said it was very slimly built and was bobbing along in this strange gait, with its arms swinging like a puppet, though it clearly wasn't a puppet because there was no strings, there was nobody else around. She says the whole body was the same color, all one color, as if it might be wearing a full-body jumpsuit, but she wasn't sure about that. The only dark thing she said on it was its eyes, or rather its eye that she saw. And with her car at a virtual stop, she says she watched it for almost a full minute. And as Diana says, it was bloody unbelievable. You don't see anything like this. I watched it for a while until it walked on a bit further. Then I started to pull away with the car. As I pulled away, I got a few yards and I stopped the car. I was going to put it into reverse gear. I looked in my mirror and there were no cars or anything behind me. Then I decided better of it, and I thought, no, I'll carry on and go to work. So
10 minutes, guys.
She felt no fear and was really just more curious and amused by the encounter. But when she was asked by researchers why she didn't stop and get out of her car, she said, I don't know. I can't explain that. The only thing I could think of was that it was a leprechaun. My perception of this little man was a leprechaun. And it was a real live one. It was a little man.
Oh, a leprechaun!
To it. So after driving off, Diana went to work, and weirdly, the experience largely left her mind. And in fact, she didn't even mention it to her family until the next night, which is totally out of character for her, as she says, and her family confirms. She can't explain this, and can only speculate on the reason, and as she says, well, I'm not really into fantasy and unbelievable things. I generally just read true stories and things, but it was too unbelievable. Thankfully, she did remember. She did talk to her family about it. She actually even called the Durham police. She told them about her sighting, and they told her that she should contact a wildlife expert. Diane explained to them that no, she saw a little man, not an animal, some kind of life form that she did not understand. But the police didn't apparently want to hear about it. On January 4th, Diana's sister decided to contact Bufora, the British UFO research organization, and shared her story with researcher Dave Newton and Jenny Randalls. They both went to Diana's home and to the location of the encounter. Diana's family vouched for her character and told Jenny Randalls, if that is what she said she saw, then that is exactly what she saw, as she is not prone to fantasy. Though the whole family was puzzled by the fact that Diana didn't tell them about it until the next day. Now, the researchers also called the police, who confirmed that Diana did in fact call them. As Jenny Randall says, I've spoken with Diana several times by telephone, as well as speaking to her at home. She's absolutely adamant that she saw the creature she describes as a leprechaun. Frankly, I can see no reason at all for her to be inventing a story of this nature. She does not want any publicity at all. It is the opinion of both investigators that Diana Logan saw a very unusual creature at the side of the road. We feel most strongly that she has related to us precisely what she felt she saw. And the other researcher, Dave Logan, says, there's little doubt in my mind that Diana believes she saw this strange little creature by the roadside. This is not a hoax. So there you go. Woman's just driving along and sees this strange little figure walking along the side of the road. It's a shame she didn't get out of her car to take a closer look, but I can understand why she wouldn't do that. So an event like this typically is very shocking.
Everything's good, guys. Don't worry.
They have a hard time trying to interpret what they're seeing. Once they realize how unusual it is, they usually get moving.
I'm reading it, Gates, brother.
Interesting and unusual case, which I also like because it was thoroughly investigated by professional researchers. And now we move to the final case of this episode.
Final case, guys.
Why aren't there more recent cases involving humanoids? And the fact is, there are, and there's quite a few of them. The 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s were kind of the heyday for this. I think because coverage was...
Oh, nice one, Gates. I'm reading it.
Cover-up is no joke, and people have been frightened out of reporting their encounters. And often it takes them years, if not decades, to come forward. There's a lot of reasons, I think, why we don't have as many modern accounts as we do ones that are, from earlier on. But this next case I call Unable to Move.
Oh yeah, I can see that, Gates.
In November 2008 in Santiago, Chile.
Even if you were, brother, a small cannabis is not something that will give you these kinds of vision. Even with a lot of alcohol. But the alcohol is trickier, guys. It's kind of, Andy. I do some little breaks sometimes. And I know Preston, so I hope he's not gonna copyright me.
Around 6 p.m.
We're kind of discussing it.
2008, was working on the rooftop of a building on the very busy and urban street Alfonso de Cordoba in Santiago, Chile, as you can see here.
Yeah, Andy, join us on Mondays.
To look up in the southern sky,
I'm trying to put his link up and make publicity, send people there, so kind of allowing me to discuss it, I hope.
And as it got close, he could see that this object was about 300 feet long and 30
Either way, if I have to take it, I'll take it out, and it will just be a hangout for us. Because we had a few people here. We had 24 people here, hopefully.
And kind of serrated with 4 points. And looking at the right window of this strange craft, the witness, Segundo...
Oh my god, that looks like
figures from the waist up, standing right next
Sonic's
to
hair. Look
both
at that,
figures
guys.
looked the same. They were light gray in color.
Look, it looked like
Their
Sonic
hands rested on
the
the door
Hedgehog
frame of the
hair.
window, and as Segundo watched, these figures moved in sort of this
Okay, 3
clumsy
minutes to go,
sideways
guys.
fashion in unison, as if they are looking for something, or perhaps watching the landscape. That's
And
his
you could do
impression.
an image of
Thus,
this
they were looking at the
on the
environment around
AI,
them,
on this
which is, in
hedgehog
fact, as you can see,
craft.
filled with many unusually shaped buildings with unique architecture.
Yep, exactly,
This craft got closer and
James,
closer to
exactly
see
that.
how unusual this craft and humanoids were, at which point he decided it might be a good
Somebody
idea to
threw
alert
it.
his coworkers who were on the lower floor. But the moment he had that thought, he found himself unable to move his
That's how
mouth.
they say they
So the only
hoaxed
part of his body he could
the
move were
Meyer
his eyes.
photos.
He felt no
Some of
fear,
them they
but as
threw
he
the
did
disc
sense
on
an
the air
increase in
and then
atmospheric pressure, which became
smashed the
more
camera.
dense as the object approached
I'd
more
like to try
closely.
that.
And in fact, it came very close. He estimated
I'm
to about 30
streaming
feet
his video
away
from
from where
last
he was working,
night.
again at the top of a building, and stayed there for just a second, and then moved off very slowly in a straight line towards
He started with a
Monte
Spanish
Chile,
case.
of the
Very good.
nearby range of the Andes Mountains. So Segundo isn't sure what these ETs were up to, sightseeing, showing themselves off. He doesn't know. He had no
The
lasting
thing is
physical
that, guys,
effects,
I like to
but have
watch
absolutely convinced him that
Preston
UFOs
Dennett's
are real. There
lives.
you
I
go.
love him.
Another
But the thing is
amazing
that we get
case.
that
What's super
special.
interesting to me about that one is that this UFO is
Let's
just
just stop for a minute. It's 1 minute to go. I kind of prefer watching them with you guys, and then we can kind of discuss it a little bit, and at the same time I can meet you guys, our new subscribers or older friends who had experiences closer to, with some similarities, and as well we can discuss them, and I can as well invite some of our viewers to come on my show, on my live show. And that's what I was asking you, Gate Smasher, if you had Facebook, because for people to come to my interviews, I need to have a way of contacting you quicker than YouTube, because YouTube, I don't I'm very late on my comments answering them. So if you answer me a comment, I may take some days to read it, because my YouTube studio and my YouTube, they don't receive the same messages. Most messages don't go to YouTube, they go to YouTube studio. Okay, guys?
hovering over this major city center. I have to believe there were a lot of other witnesses who just didn't report it. Hard to say. Perhaps they were showing themselves off, particularly to this one gentleman, which could be. Because I also find it fascinating that as soon as he thought of getting other witnesses, that's when he found that he was unable to move. But the fact that it came so close to him, literally eye to eye, 30 feet away, with these little guys staring right at him, that makes me think this was an intentional display. I don't know how else to put it. But again, as always, you can make up your own mind about it. So, there you go. 10 amazing cases
No
of
worries,
people
Gates.
who
Do
are
you have
friends with
Discord?
extraterrestrials. Again, I do think that's what we're dealing with. And here we have clearly metallic craft, which are leaving landing traces. They've got portholes, windshields, there's little people inside of them. They're doing their thing as we're doing ours. I honestly
Doing
do
their
believe that
thing.
most of these cases can be explained as extraterrestrials in the classic sense. But what I just want to
Yep,
do
I
is
know what you
present the
mean,
evidence
Gates.
so everyone can make up their own minds about it.
And they just
As
need
you can see,
to
these
catch you
cases
once,
have been going on a
and
very long
then
time, all over the world. A lot of people are seeing them. There's all kinds of evidence supporting them. And I think it's important that people know
yes,
that
James,
is
have you
why I
slept
do
yet,
this
brother?
research. Once again, I really want to thank you for watching.
Okay, nice one, Gates. When you have a Discord, you don't have to, you can also have, do you have a PlayStation app?
Most of all, keep having fun.
Keep having fun, Preston. Love you, brother. That's nice. Look at that. Oh, look at that. Wonderful, guys. Yeah, I got Discord, I got a PlayStation app, and I got YouTube and Facebook. I got WhatsApp as well, Gates, but you don't have to contact on WhatsApp. I don't want to ask you for your phone number. I don't. It's not. It's private. If there's other way, there's other way, guys. Okay, so guys, I think I've done. I put a video yesterday, guys. I wanted to show you. What do you think, guys? Is this? What do you think this is, guys? Hmm? This is the video I put last night, guys. It's not very good quality. Sorry about that. Okay, so guys, I'll just put the link on the. That's an illusion effect on the boat. Could be a boat further away. Okay, check this link, guys. Stay blessed. Please don't come to China. Okay, guys. Tell me what you think about that. Let me show you how my bench is getting, guys. My bench is starting to get very good. Yesterday I was filling the little holes. Look at this, guys. It's becoming very, very pretty, guys. Look at that. I'm gonna start using the... I'm just filling in the holes, you know, guys? Filling the holes. It's still kind of rough, the paint, can you see? So I'm gonna start using the sandpaper, as Johnny Small Peppers told me. Can you see, guys? There's still some holes there. Look, one hole there. There's still some holes I need to put paint on, and I have to do it a little bit, you know, it's time consuming. Can you see these little holes here? So I'm gonna have to put paint inside of them, and then I'm gonna have to repaint this to create a little layer, and then after the layer is done, I can sandpaper it all. I think that's gonna take more time, guys, is the sandpapering. Yeah, I'm always getting it dirty, guys, because there's a lot of wood here. Hope you enjoy it, guys. Sorry about that. Got a lot of wood here. Wood, wood, wood. More wood there. More wood there. This is the stick I found on the beach. The driftwood piece, guys. It's a little green here. Can you see, guys? It has a little... It may have burned, guys. It may have been a little bit burned. I'm not sure. And that one over there, that one here, this one here, the one on the back, it's a bigger one. And that's my staff. I haven't started working on it yet. I've got a lot of projects here, guys. But I want to finish some before I start. Here, guys, is my compass I use. Can you see? When I go to the woods. If it gets too, if the compass gets too crazy, I know that something's happening, guys. Either way, thank you very much for staying with us, guys. We had an awesome time. Please do have a wonderful rest of weekend, guys. And please keep looking at the skies and let me know if you see anything, okay, guys? Oh, nice, Jimmy. Share screen, phone. Ah, okay. Wow, that's good. That's good, James. I was reading your message. Either way, guys, thank you very much for coming. Gates, please let me know when you have a Discord, and leave me a comment, and I'll give you my name for Discord. We have a wonderful team at Discord with the Guerrilla Gamer family. So I hope if anyone wants my Discord, just let me know, okay, guys? Again, I'm gonna go back to telling you guys to please visit Preston Dennets' channel. Okay, guys? And the name of the channel is sorry about that, guys. I'm gonna put the link up. Preston Dennett, big hug to you. I hope you check my channel. Oh, you've probably checked because I've told you 100 times that I do UFO reports here in Portugal. And a big hug to Dolly as well. She's a big part of of his channel as well. Either way, guys, thank you very much for being here. It's been a pleasure. Have a blessed weekend. We will always strive to be kind and good to each other, guys, okay? Blessed weekend, everyone. Oh, Jimmy, every Mondays I'm there, and I've shown you on some streams before, I think. I always have an extra phone to check some channels, you know, if I think that's, you know, I learn a lot in every channels, but Preston, then it's been like a safe haven for I don't know, for my beliefs, you know, kind of. And Dolly, she's very intriguing, and you know, I'm not telling you guys to believe anything, okay, guys? I do not believe. Wait a second. See you, Linda. Okay, guys, I'm gonna have to go. It's getting cold outside for my kids. Either way, guys, I don't want to tell you what to do. I'm not a preacher. I'm a messenger, guys, and a researcher, and a kind light being, guys. Love light being. And please do whatever you want with you guys, with yourself, guys. Just if you have any sightings that you think that will be good for spreading the message, let me know. Either way, guys, I'm not sure if this video will stay on very long, but if it doesn't, I will put it non-listed, and I'll send you the link if you guys want to check it. But you just have to check Preston Dennets' channel, guys. Every Saturday he launches a video, and Mondays we have Lightgate, and occasionally on Wednesdays, or I'm not sure, the other day he does have a show on another radio with a lady. I'm not sure, I don't know, remember her name. Stay blessed, my people. See you on the next one, okay? A lot of love for everyone. Everyone, John P loves you, and please keep being yourselves, guys, okay, and girls? Because if you or if you change, evolve. Don't change for anyone. Just change because you want it. Oh, and great to see you, sister. You're part of the Smurf family now. See you on the next one, okay, guys? Thank you very much for joining us. Where did oh, here it is. Peace, everyone. Do a hike today, okay? And help someone. Love you guys.